Hello. Thank you all for being here. We're getting ready to begin now. I just want to let you all know that the event's about to start. If you need to get up and have a bathroom break or grab a snack or a drink, please feel free to do so. But yeah, let's get started. Thank you all for being here. Yeah. So welcome to the public plenary for the symposium, Black Trans Futurities, Political Imaginaries in the Academy and the Arts, here at Arizona State University. I am Dr. Sa Whitley, one of the co-conveners of this symposium. I am an assistant professor of women and gender studies here at ASU in the School of Social Transformation. I'm also one of two co-directors of the Queer X Humanities Initiative at ASU Humanities Institute. Black Trans Futurities, our symposium, is a two-day symposium with both public and insular sessions here today and tomorrow. The planning committee includes myself, my colleague in the ASU School of Social Transformation, Dr. Erin Mallory, and yes, Dr. Erin Mallory, woo! And two very remarkable, brilliant who are gender studies PhD and Eshe St. Germain. Among the many folks who are joining us here today who live in the greater Phoenix metropolitan area, we have 33 plus scholars, students, and artists from around Turtle Island and from positions in the art world and the academy. The ASU Black Trans Futurities Symposium is a function, so to speak, that invites scholars, artists, students, and other thinkers and dreamers to convene and discuss the state of the field of Black trans studies. We have been jamming about the vibrant theoretical interventions, the divergent ways of knowing and doing research, and the productive debates that this field has been beholding for the past decade. We have had a change in our lineup for the evening. And we have one keynote speaker for the conference, who is Dr. LaVelle Ridley. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, joining us from the Ohio State University. And you all will hear her full bio later in just a moment. After Dr. Ridley's keynote lecture, we have three of the participants from the larger Black Trans Futurities Conference who will excitedly join us for the roundtable up here. These roundtable panelists, I'll say all three of their names first, include Dr. Ashe Stevens, Dr. Ian-Khara Ellesante, and Dr. Eshe Stevens. Thank you all for joining us. Now, before we get started, I'd like to give a land statement about the place where we are gathered to host this convening. The planning committee for the ASU Symposium, who I mentioned just now, acknowledges the 23 Native nations that have inhabited this land for centuries. Arizona State's 4 campuses are located in the Salt River Valley on ancestral lands of indigenous peoples. We thank and honor the native tribes and sovereign nations of the Salt River Valley, for whom this is unceded territory, including the Akimel Odom, Onk Akimel Odom, and the Peepash nations, whose knowledge, care, and stewardship of the land and waterways allows us to be here now. We recognize the sovereignty of these nations, and I think as folks that are interested in Black trans feminist thought, we are also very invested in thinking with two-spirit critique and indigenous studies, right, or American Indian studies and Native feminist studies. As a planning committee and people living on this land, we consider right relations and a politics of grounded relationality as something we are moving toward intentionally rather than something that we have already accomplished. Before moving into our programming for the evening, I'd like to thank, again, the graduate students who have helped us, the event staff in our department, the School of Social Transformation, who have been phenomenal, our marketing staff. Yeah. This event would have been impossible without you, so thank you so much for your support, along with the support of our colleagues in the School of Social Transformation. And yeah, With that, I think we will, sort of get into the politics of this moment, right? Which are very intense, and we're all trying to sort of navigate and understand, right? This is a moment in which we're experiencing a lot of anti-transgender legislation, executive orders from the Trump administration, and this is a moment where we need to think about, like, how do we make it so that Black trans lives matter, that we will be in the future, this is a settler colonial state, right? This is a US empire. We didn't have any pretense about trans visibility being the sort of end-all be-all of our liberation. But yeah, we are going to fight, right? We are going to fight, and that struggle is on the university campus, right? That doesn't know how to hold us right now, or refuses to hold us right now. It's in the art world that refuses to name us right now and promote our events right now. We feel that erasure, that's sort of this advanced compliance that's happening right now. And we're not complying, we're not here to comply, we're here to, cruise the past, to quote Jose Esteban Munoz, right? We're gonna cruise the past, the present, our beautiful aesthetics, our performativities, our lifeways, our survival strategies, our politics, our voices, our willingness to be Black and trans and non-binary on the front lines for Palestine, right? On the front lines for all of these interconnected struggles, right? So yeah, I just wanted to speak on that a little bit off the cuff to let you know what this moment is. We are sort of at the university, but not of the university, right? And so we'll sort of continue these threads in just a moment. But for right now, I'd like to bring up Dr. Erin Mallory, who will tell you about some of the folks we've collaborated with, including for tomorrow, and some of the co-sponsors that have also made this event very possible. Thank you so much.
That was great, and I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be here, and it's great to see all your faces, and I love that so many people made the efforts to come out here to be with us for these 2 days. It's going to be a great time, and I'm really excited for this plenary talk that we're having. I want to give a shout out to the people who've donated money and took the time to recognize what we're doing. I believe me and Sa started writing these initial grants like almost 2 years ago, and trying to get the money to put on this event eventually. So it's really great to see this come to fruition, and it's really, really great to see all y'all here taking part in this. And this is a lot of labor, and part of that labor is the money that's been donated for this event. And so here's the list. We always want to just shout out their names. We have ASU School of Social Transformation. We have Queer X Humanities. We have the ASU New College of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences on West Campus. We have the ASU Center for Work and Democracy. We have the Social Transformation Lab. We have the ASU Arizona State University Humanities Institute. And so tomorrow, if you go to the Poetry Night, you'll see another collaboration we have with Them's Phoenix, who is a queer-led kind of artistic group that does programming for queer communities in Arizona and Phoenix. And so we've partnered with them to put on their Fruity Poetry Night, which will center Black trans and Black non-binary voices in Arizona. So we're looking forward to have y'all participating in that. And yeah, let's just give a round of applause to people who've made this possible, which I think is really, really great and really solid.
All right, and now we'll have Sarah Keaton introduce our keynote speaker. Just kidding, it'll be Eshe St. Germain, awesome.
And upset. Okay. Hi, everybody. It is my great honor to introduce Dr. LaVelle Ridley as our keynote speaker featured in our Black Trans Futurities public plenary. Dr. LaVelle Ridley is Assistant Professor of Queer and Trans Studies in the Department of Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at The Ohio State University. Dr. Ridley's research and teaching interests meet at the intersection of queer and transgender studies, Black feminisms, and literary and cultural studies of racialized gender and sexuality. Through life writing, film, and media, she observes how trans women of color use imagination critically to transform the world at large. She is currently working on her first book project, tentatively titled Imagining Freedom: Critical Trans Imagination in Black Trans Life Narratives, which articulates how Black trans women life writers, such as Janet Mock, Cece McDonald, and Venus Selenite, engage in political freedom making through their life narratives. In her 2019 essay, Imagining Otherly, Performing Possible Black Trans Futures in Tangerine, Dr. Ridley writes, quote, "Radical transfeminism's priority of care and support provides an epistemological backing to imagining otherly, showing how it reveals the sometimes contradictory epistemic nature of Black trans women's community formations. Dr. Ridley also engages in interdisciplinary collaboration in both academic and community spaces, particularly around prison abolition, oral history, and understanding the cultural philosophies of queer and trans people of color. Her work has been published in peer-reviewed journals such as Feminist Studies, GLQ, a journal of lesbian and gay studies, and TSQ, Transgender Studies Quarterly, the latter for which she serves as book reviews editor. Dr. Ridley is also co-editing the forthcoming anthology titled Paradise on the Margins, Worldmaking by Trans Women of Color. Dr. Ridley is the recipient of the 2023-2024 University of California President's Postdoctoral Fellowship. She has received additional grants and awards for her scholarship and community-engaged work from the University of Michigan, the Schoenberg Center for Research on Black Culture in Harlem, as well as the Miss Major Alexander L. Lee TGI Justice Project Black Trans Cultural Center in San Francisco. I can think of no one more fitting to begin our Black Trans Futurities plenary, as it is in Dr. Ridley's work in literary trans studies that I begin to locate a trans future for not only myself, but for my kin. Instead of focusing only on the ramifications of representation, much like Dr. Whitley was speaking to, Dr. Ridley questions what Black trans epistemology can look like and what value we might find in Black trans knowledge. Dr. Ridley writes, quote, "I claim tranifesting specifically as a framework for imagining otherly, as well as an epistemological function that points us towards understanding how Black trans people's labor and value might lead to alternative trans futures. The performance scene allows viewers to see that other paths are available to Black trans women, even when they have to forge them themselves." It is my incredible privilege to ask you all to join me in welcoming Dr. LaVelle Ridley.
I mean, wow. Thank you so much for that, incredible and really beautiful introduction. And hello and good evening to everyone. It's my sincere pleasure to be here with you all this evening, and I've definitely been looking forward to the symposium for months, so all the excitement and energy around it is definitely, I think, paying off in lots of good ways. So I'm very happy, all right, to share this space with you all. So thank you to Drs. Erin Mallory and Sa Whitley for inviting me to the symposium and asking me to speak, as well as to the School of Transformation, the Queer X Humanities, and all other organizers and entities that are convening us here at ASU for these couple of days, which truly are some engaging activities, some enlivening discussions, and for me, at least most importantly, some really critical spaces for thought and for care, too. So for my remarks today, which I've kind of put under the title of Consulting with the Black Trans Fates, Black Trans Futurities Within Our Grasp, I'd like to take you on a brief triptych-esque journey through time, space, and ideas. So I'm drawn to the idea of the triptych, three images connected to each other, all telling a single story, because as many of us know, the number 3 is strong, balanced, and a very classic referent for storytelling. One need not look far for many examples in our cultures: the sun, moon, and stars, faith, hope, and love, Michelle, Kelly, and Beyonce, the Holy Trinity of Christianity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, the Trimurti, or the Holy Triumvirate of Hinduism, Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, and also the fates of classical mythology, also known as the Moirai, though as many cultures held sacred the image of 3 figures, usually women of varying ages, so maiden, mother, and crone, there's that 3 again, who weave the destiny of the world through the lives of the living. Growing up myself as the only child of a single working mother, I gravitated to stories and storytelling to give me a sense of safety, security, comfort, and also pleasure. Stories, particularly mythological ones, provided me a way of understanding myself and the world. As my awareness of different mythological systems across the globe grew, I began noticing that the Greeks were not the only civilization to believe in a triad of goddesses who governed destiny and fate. For the Romans, they were known as the Parcae. For the Norse, they were known as the Norns, and so on. As I continued growing up as a Black queer trans person, I noticed other narrative patterns in the world around me. I noticed that the same politicians who legislate and speak openly against trans and queer people, immigrants, and poor people are the first in line to exploit them. I noticed that the sensitivity and fragility that others bullied me for and accused me of as a queer person was actually a projection of the fragile lines around these social constructs that we exist within and defend with cyclical patterns of violent behavior. Sadly, in our world, not much has changed on that front, but what has changed over time, other than my own gender and sometimes sexuality, is the unfolding firm belief in the transformative capacity of imagining the world as not only different, but also able to become different. Once you realize you, yes you, can make an impact on the world, somehow, there's almost nothing stopping you. Belief in this transformative power led me to pursue and complete my PhD in English and Women's and Gender Studies, and while doing so, I developed a research and teaching agenda that brings my personal, political, and intellectual interests into alignment. So just to explain a little bit more on my background, I'm a scholar of Black feminist cultural studies and transgender studies, and my work is animated by curiosity in the discursive history of trans women of color in the US. This curiosity and desire for intellectual engagement is rooted in collective ethics of care across space and time. By prioritizing Black feminist processes of knowledge and freedom-making, my work broadens the intellectual genealogy of trans studies, which, as many have critiqued already today here at the symposium, has been thoroughly dominated by white, Anglophone, Western scholars and the biases that they often carry. I'm currently working on my monograph, Imagining Freedom, Critical Trans Imagination in Black Trans Life Narratives, which examines contemporary Black trans women's life writing in the US and uses an interdisciplinary Black feminist approach to trans studies in order to argue that imagination is a key facet of political resistance and social transformation for these writers. By analyzing the autobiographical acts and the narrative modes of self-fashioning employed by writers such as Toni Newman, Janet Mock, Cece McDonald, and Venus Selenite, I explore their subjectivity and their self-making through a matrix of narrative and embodied self-fashioning practices that I call critical trans imagination. Through understanding these writers as philosophers who construct radical counter-narratives and counter-knowledges, trans studies and other related fields can more closely consider issues that we deal with in our world, such as global racial capitalism and critiquing neoliberal strategies of inclusion that tend to funnel our energy away from our liberation struggles. My work within the book, and beyond in other spaces, addresses the lack of Black trans women-generated knowledge, but also altering the metric by which we assess the future of our field. So put simply, if Black trans women are good enough to lead the revolution, we should be more than equipped to theorize about it as well. For me, that has been one of the most central aspects of critique that has emerged in the field following the 2017 publishing of the Transgender Studies Quarterly Special Issue on the issue of Blackness. This special issue helped launch a long overdue conversation within the field of trans studies, and much art and scholarship has come after its publication. The anthology Trapdoor, Transcultural Production and the Politics of Visibility showcases compelling work, for example. And that anthology features folks like Che Gossett, their incredible sibling Tourmaline, Eric A. Stanley, Juliana Huxtable, Misha Cardenas, Ava Hayward, and many other key figures who are invested in thinking through the contours of our contemporary moment, and we're thinking critically about race, gender, sexuality, class, and the politics of representability aids in our struggle for liberation. Other key texts that expand our thinking within the field are Eric Stanley's book, Atmospheres of Violence, Structuring Antagonism in the Trans Queer Ungovernable, and also Cameron Awkward-Rich's book, The Terrible We, Thinking with Trans Maladjustment. Both of these books take dominant narratives about queers, trans people, mad and poor folks, and reveal how contradictions within our society reveal both the central role of state-sponsored violence in the US, and as well as modeling modes of criticism that work against these dominant and dominating ideologies. My own ideas around Blackness, transness, culture, and art, and what's at stake for us in these struggles toward liberation have benefited from the richness of these works and others. A few years ago, I was fortunate enough to join several other Black trans thinkers on a roundtable. Honestly, it was about all of us in the field in the country, since there's only a handful. And I was able to join them on a roundtable, which was published in the journal Feminist Studies in 2022. The piece was titled Between Inconceivable and Criminal, Black Trans Feminism and the History of the Present. I was one voice in a chorus of prescient Black trans scholars, which included Matt Richardson, Eve Brown, Theo Cotton, C. Riley Snorton, and Che Gossett. We discussed the impending consequences of the incoming political regime and how issues around bodily autonomy, namely reproductive, trans, and disability issues, would continue to be central in our theorizing as well as our organizing. Reflecting on this essay reminds me of the power and the beauty of working collaboratively, as well as also how trans folks, particularly Black trans folks, always tend to have this touch of destiny about them, or some ability to work fate and destiny into a certain form for themselves. The names of the many artists, activists, and scholars that I've brought into the room signify the foundation upon which much of Black trans studies so far has been built. The future of the field lies with some of them, sure, but it also lies in other places. As my work and that of others makes clear, scholarly writing in the university cannot be the center of how we consider knowledge production. As our current political climate evidences daily, it is not a sustainable model for passing on knowledge and skills to the next generation. Indeed, some of you in this room or on the live stream will lead the new directions in the field. For me, it has been such a pleasure to witness the growth of many Black and brown, trans and queer students and thinkers, both in and outside the campus. Here I'm thinking specifically about the work of Victor Ultra Omni, a brilliant Black trans scholar of ballroom culture and history, and a dear friend of mine, who's also here. By reminding us to always, as he writes in his work, center the deviant subjects by reshaping trans studies around the recognition that power's reorganization is heavily inflected by those with the most marginal relationship to power, and also gathering trans studies so tightly by claiming that the field, quote, has not read the proverbial balls flyer, and therefore simply does not know how to bring it for the judges, for that matter. In other words, the field is not walking the category correctly. But it does not have to be a total chop or a loss, end quote. So offering hope after such a sharp read is a talent indeed, and I have high hopes for the future of the field, if these are the folks that we have shepherding it. I would like to see more thinking at the intersection of Black studies, trans studies, and disability justice, as well as thinking internationally, intergenerationally, and across species. I would even add to, I think it's important for us to be also thinking about the politics of indigeneity and settler colonialism, and importantly, not just here in the US. Additionally, I think more art and scholarship that's focused specifically on T4T relationships, love, and community building would be wonderful, life-giving energy to bring into the world. I myself will lead the charge on the branch focusing on the splendor of transmasculine vulnerability and handsomeness. Those who know me personally know that that is not a joke. In closing, I hope that this symposium and all that we hope to achieve here bears ample fruit in both the short and the long term. With the bitter fascist regimes tightening around us, I often remind myself, my students, my colleagues, my comrades, that we have so much power between us collectively, and it's our duty to use that power to help us remove as many chains as possible. The literal chains of the prison-industrial complex, the ideological chains of neoliberalism, the material chains of capitalism, and the spiritual chains of white ethno-nationalist supremacy. I believe we can all be free and equal, and that the future, our Black trans future, is well within our grasp. We will continue to reach and struggle for it until we have it, and how truly wonderful that will be. Thank you. All right, now I think we're transitioning to the panel portion.
We are.
All right.
So if the panelists can join us up here. And while we're getting situated up here for our roundtable, if you all have any questions that you're thinking with, we will have a Q&A with the audience, so maybe jot those down now. And now we will have Sarah Keaton come up and just introduce these panelists, or roundtablists, for us today. Sarah Keaton, hi.
Hello, all. Okay, so our first panelist is Eshe Stevens. They are an assistant professor in the Department of Criminology, Law, and Justice, an affiliated faculty in Black Studies and Gender and Women's Studies at UIC. They are an abolitionist, and their work focuses on the range of ways that trans and gender nonconforming people are policed and surveilled in society, the experiences and consequences of that policing and surveillance, and strategies that folks use to resist state-sanctioned violence. He also teaches courses on borders and occupation and feminist sports studies with the Prison Neighborhood Arts and Education Project, or PNAP, and is a board member with the Transformative Justice Law Project. Eshe Stevens. And then our next panelist is Ian-Khara Ellesante. They are a Black, queer, gender infinite parent, poet, teacher, and cultural studies scholar. Their poetry has appeared in various journals and anthologies, and their critical writing, including their essay, Dear Trans Studies, Can You Do Love, has appeared in Transgender Studies, Quarterly, Ethnic and Racial Studies, and Families in Society. Ian-Khara is a Cave Canem Fellow, recipient of the New Millennium Award for Poetry, and finalist for the National Poetry Series 2024 competition. Proudly hailing from Memphis, Ian-Khara has also loved living and writing in Tuscan, Brooklyn, and now Southern Maine, where they teach gender and sexuality studies and Africana at Bates College. And last but not least, Eshe Sherley is a historian of Black politics, gender, and sexuality and labor in the 20th century United States. Before joining the African American Studies faculty at Wake Forest, Eshe was a postdoctoral fellow at the Carter G. Woodson Institute for African American and African Studies at UVA. Dr. Sherley received a BA in African American Studies from Yale University and a PhD in history from the University of Michigan with a concentration in women and gender studies.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And thank you all for being so attentive to Dr. Ridley's amazing keynote lecture. Thank you so much for traveling to be here with us, and thank you all for traveling to be here with us. To kick things off, I'm going to ask Dr. Ridley a couple of questions. The other panelists will also sort of give some responses to the talk that she just gave. And then we'll sort of just like have a free-flowing conversation, offering each other provocations and sort of thinking about the state of the field, right, of Black trans studies, right, and where it's going. Okay, so with that, I think as a lot of us have been saying, Eshe in their sort of opening remarks as well, or your introduction as well, and in your talk, this is a moment, right, where we need to be imagining otherly, right? In all the ways, right? And so can you sort of explain a bit more what that means from a Black trans feminist lens as you've written about it? I know in relation to a variety of different types of Black trans femme cultural production and archives, maybe some stories in the Digital Transgender Archive, right? Such a great resource among others. So what do you mean when you say imagine otherly?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. And also, I'm really grateful too for including the article I wrote, Imagining Otherly, in the bio, and like explicitly wrapping in those ideas that I started kind of cooking on, if you will, in that essay, thinking about the role that imagination kind of has to play. And also, to answer the question, I'll say that what inspired that essay, in particular, my viewing and analysis of the film Tangerine with Maya Taylor in it, and Kiki Rodriguez, what stood out to me was here was a radically different kind of representation from my perspective as a Black trans woman, of watching Black trans women act as themselves, Black trans women with experiences of sex work in LA, and the dynamic that they have with each other as sisters and as Black trans women. So for me, it kind of evidenced both that, of course, something that many of us know just in our bodies and through our own experiences of the world is that in many ways, the way that the world is set up now is in many ways intolerable. Living under racial capitalism, the ableism of it all, the heterosexism, the anti-Blackness, the Zionism, for millions and millions of us on the planet, it's not an okay or a sustainable way to live. So as a feminist, as a Black feminist, radically believing and accepting that and absorbing that into my own politics and experiences helps me arrive at the conclusion then naturally that, or for me naturally, that there's something in the something about the relationships and that Black trans women can have with themselves as viewer and audience, as sisters within a film, as co-workers on a set, as as collaborators with me, in the essay, producing the knowledge there, between that and the need to the literal material spiritual need to make the world different than what it is, I think all together provide the Black trans feminist foundation that my concept kind of relies on. So those are always the motivating forces for me, that both that we know that the world right now is not okay, and that there's something else out there for us, and that we have the ability to bring it about. And imagination is one way that we do that.
Yeah, and that sort of reminds me of, just like writings on, and some of our conversations earlier today on Black trans kinship and Black trans domesticity, right? Just hearing you describe the actresses in Tangerine in Los Angeles acting as themselves, is how you put it. But yeah, you said sisterly, right? So I wanted to speak to, a question that actually comes from this conversation that you mentioned here, between inconceivable and criminal Black trans feminism and the history of the present. I believe it's Matt Richardson who sort of poses this question. What is the difference between Black feminism and Black trans feminism, right? in how we're sort of thinking about, just the theories themselves, but I'm sure that we sort of could apply this to like sort of our understandings of kinship that you sort of were also speaking to there. But I think just maybe the first question is, we are imagining otherly with Black trans feminist thought. And so what makes it sort of a different intellectual formation and political envisioning, different but maybe related than Black trans feminism, if at all?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a really brilliant question. And the beauty of it too is that there can be different answers for folks in the field, and surely would be. Put plainly for me to think back to that piece and the ways that we were speaking with each other on the roundtable and before everything went to print. For us, the conversation we were having and kind of what my takeaway from it, as the article shows, is that Black trans feminism allows us to really radically see the non-linearity in not only feminism and feminist projects, but Black feminism specifically, which is already a non-linear thing. I love the question in one of the sessions earlier today, asking the panelists to think about Blackness specifically and like how Blackness impacts that. And so Blackness and all of the non-linearity and like the way that it throws, signals trouble for different formations of things is kind of what's most important for me. It's no surprise that there's been, we still need a lot more Black trans voices in the conversation regarding feminism and feminist projects, especially non-binary and Black trans feminine voices specifically. And something that I think is really like an important move for me is, for example, now all Black feminists, as we know, and throughout the kind of classic canon of Black feminist thought, have not always been trans affirming or inclusive in all those kinds of ways. There's a way in which even in the critique of the category of woman that Black feminism does, there's an extent to that critique or only has room for certain kinds of bodies or experiences. So I think what Black trans feminism does, other than provide an additive approach to just adding the T into Black feminism, I think what it does is really dramatically shifts, it kind of it throws shade on that whole genealogy in a sense by kind of coloring it in a way that allows access to fuller dimensions of these conversations. Mm-hmm. So for example, I'll say in my work, I borrow the concept I came up with that I'm working on for the book, critical trans imagination. A part of that is a borrowing of something that Bell Hooks writes about in one of her books in the 90s on cultural politics and race and all that. And she has the concept of that she names just critical imagination, in saying that Black artists and scholars need to be able to think beyond, have to create a worldview in a white supremacist world that goes beyond just an oppositional view. That's not just we are opposed to racists and white supremacists, and we want something more. We need something more expansive than just that. So. And as many folks know, Bell Hooks was not always the most, trans-affirming, sister to the girls all the time. So even in moments when she tried, and which, and so something that means a lot for me in my Black trans feminism is to think through how does trans, especially with an asterisk, kind of really develop that concept of needing to develop a critical imagination for the most marginal scholars and artists.
Absolutely. And it's been exciting to see Black trans feminist thinkers like Dora Silva Santana really expanding what that asterisk is doing, right? And also, I think it's her piece on transitionings and returnings, right? Talking about, sort of that processes of moving across water, right? In terms of migration. And so thinking about transition in trans theory, not just as gender transition, but also this sort of transitivity, right, between Blackness and transness. Did you want to speak to that? But I think that there is this sort of turn to the diasporic in Black trans feminist thought as well, that I think is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you brought up Dora's work, which is fantastic. I was very grateful to have a chance to get to spend some time with her. She's now a assistant professor in gender and women's studies at UC Berkeley, which is just where I was at for my postdoc there last academic year. And so it was so wonderful to just hang out with her and think with her. Also, Berkeley could not handle more than one trans woman of color, and it was too much for them. So we often was like, we can't meet on campus. We have to meet off campus. We have to meet all the way in Oakland, not in Berkeley. But it was really powerful, and she in particular, encourages us in those of us who think specifically about the relationship between Black feminist thinking and trans studies too, and where many of us fall on that plate, as it were, is a great example of what is at stake for thinking diasporically, intergenerationally, and across these borders, which, just to be reminded, are also social constructs, not real things grounded in the world. They're things that the powers that be, as Miss Major calls them, whoever is in power at that time, no matter if they're Democrat, Republican, the powers that be depend on those borders being real. And so thinking about Dora's work and the work of Brazilian travestis, who she cites often, and lots of other trans women of color scholars who are thinking across diasporas and thinking transnationally provides a clear way of not only thinking about a way of not centering the U.S. specifically or these Western kinds of ways of thinking, but also for me, the ability to show that there's knowledge in other sites other than just the academy, than the institution, than the peer-reviewed journal. There's people in our communities that we can go talk to that have the knowledge and have the experience, that have the history that we need. So yeah, I am also excited to see how in my own work I'm able to incorporate those kinds of those ways of thinking, because I'm sure it'll make the work all the richer.
And I think a part of that work that she's doing, and a lot of Black trans feminist thinkers are doing with trans, is thinking about transatlantic, right? And sort of thinking about that history of chattel slavery and what Saidiya Hartman calls the afterlife of slavery, how that, the sort of gender relations, the sort of grammar of violence, right, during chattel slavery, not just in the United States, but in the Americas, informs the sort of gender trouble of Blackness, right? The ungendering of Blackness through the violence that Black trans femmes and women are experiencing, right? The sort of way in which Black trans femme and Black women's life chances are sort of, I think it's 62% of the, I think I'm looking at this HRC report, 62% of the violence against trans folks, according to that, I think, 2023 report, is against Black trans women and femmes, right? And so I think a lot of Black trans thinkers are, thinking with folks like Black trans feminist thinkers are thinking with Black feminists like Hortense Spillers as well, Saidiya Hartman, Christina Sharp, who has that book in the Wake, right? So there's this theme of water, but that takes us to, including Tinsley's work as well, Black Atlantic, Queer Atlantic, that forces the present, sort of the modern world to think about the ways that the sort of gendered violence of slavery and the sort of ungendering that sort of happened is happening now in the violence we're experiencing, is happening now, today. And so did you want to speak about that sort of connection as well? And if maybe any of that analysis around transatlantic sort of wakes or the sort of ungendering that Spillers talks about is in your work?
A little of it is, yes. I definitely notice in my work, especially as I've been continuing to work on the monograph, that I'm heavily in conversation with those scholars that you just mentioned, who are doing that step of demonstrating what modes of analysis and critique can look like when you marry the kind of traditional Black feminist, women of color, third world women, however you term it, scholarships and practices into their own kind of queer, trans, lines of thought where they're thinking about these things. So like Tinsley, Matt Richardson, Sharp, all those folks are really influential for me in my thinking. And kind of what they really, like something that I'm thinking about when I think about what their work means for Black trans feminist scholars specifically is, just as you kind of said, the cyclicalness of it, the way that these, and kind of what I was trying to gesture to with thinking about like these narrative patterns that I've noticed over and over, and as many of us even might notice is like it's what happened with in historical processes of chattel slavery, of colonial settler violence, like those are processes of course, like obvious material, like, violence and domination of certain kinds of folks in the world, but it's also like an organizing technique, like something that, like you said, the word modern, like literally these are the moves that move us into another time. So like at those times, centuries ago, modernity, kind of. So it's really interesting for me to see, like, for example, something I have just been, not obsessed in a bad way, but like have been like, this is such a clear, like, it's interesting that like some of our parents are like, you're getting a degree in women's studies, like, what's that going to be? I literally don't even have to lesson plan this academic year. I could have just said, we're going to watch the news and what pops up, we'll talk about it. It will provide us plenty of, of material to discuss on the fly. So any more need to show how valuable and necessary a field is to be able to critique the world around you while you're actively being targeted. So there's that. But also for me, it's like it goes to show, and as I'm getting older, like noticing like, yeah, these patterns, they're just, these are just other operations of power attempting to put us into nice categories to be exploited, So like the White House being like, yeah, there's only two genders now. The country only recognizes two genders. Like there's a time in which a statement like that would hold some power. Like, okay, but like my students in my trans studies class just laugh. And that's the kind of imaginative resistance I want. Not, the government said so. Like, no, it's more of a like, no, fuck you. Like, that's not what we're gonna do. So we've come too far and are just in a place that is not at all conducive to that kind of world anymore. So, and that's the kind of like thinking and action I like to move with. So.
Wonderful. So I want to give a chance to these wonderful panelists who I know enjoyed your talk as well, to sort of maybe offer any provocations or thoughts that they had about your talk and where the conversation has gone.
Does my lapel mic, can you all hear me? Or do I need we good? Okay. I actually want to go back to Sa, where you started us, about how Dr. Ridley is thinking about imagining otherly and her work on the film Tangerine, because I loved your answer to that. But I also want to add that part of what I think you're doing is highlighting how Black trans femmes have taken that imagination and used it to develop new ways to take care of each other, to be smart and be brilliant in the way that they navigate the systems that they're living within to make sure each other are good, right? Like that's part of what that sisterhood looks like concretely in that film and in your analysis of that film. And I think that's one of the things that we can take away both from your scholarship, but also just from like what Black trans women, Black trans femmes are doing right now to try to survive this moment. We all need to learn from folks who have had to do this before we were all in crisis, people who have always had to deal with unfolding crises in their lives. How do you make it through that? There are folks who have those lessons, and I think, LaVelle, you're centering those folks in your scholarship, which kind of leads me to what I wanted to say to you about your talk, which is that, you're talking about how Black trans women are theorists, period, right? And I want to live in a world and an academy where we recognize that for what it is when we talk about Black feminism, which is Black women's history, right? My training is primarily in history. I think there are a lot of people who won't claim what people are doing in Black trans studies, what people like you are doing around using life history to tell Black trans women's histories, to be in conversation with them, to tell their own histories. That's, to me, like how I was trained, like that's what Black women is. We say Black women make theory. Black women can tell their own stories. And like that's what I see you doing. And I think it's a challenge to that field to say this is also history, and this is also doing Black women's history. Like no asterisks, no like period. So I just wanted to offer that because I think one of the things that I take away from your work is thinking differently about what it means to do history, right? That life writing can be history. But the kind of provocation I wanted to offer that kind of comes out of your talk is that you give us the three fates and this idea of myths. And myth is so important to how society is made. I mean, it's part of why your intervention around imagination is important. So much of what we get in around the myths that structure than the concrete things that we build, right, to reflect those myths in the world. And so my question to you, and perhaps maybe to the rest of our panel, if you're interested in engaging with it, is what are the myths that Black trans feminism explodes? And also, what are the myths we need? What's the stories that we need to survive? Because myths also sustain as much as they can kind of confine. So I would, especially the literature person, I would love to hear your thoughts. Like, what are the myths we need right now?
First of all, thank you. That's I appreciate your reflecting back on me, Eshe, and I really my initial comment that I'll say, and then I'll get into the myths that we need. I think a lot of what you're saying about specifically the way in which my work is trying to really go out of the way to show the truth that these stories are a history, are a part of our history, specifically Black women's history, is absolutely the intellectual vibe that aligns with what my work's trying to do, specifically as Black trans women generated knowledge, is show that exact dynamic. And just as a Black trans woman myself, it's not all of us, but for many of us, it's who do we in our lives look to teach us the things that we may or may not need to be women or be femmes or just to be safe in the world. It may be just the Black women in our lives. Some of those women may be trans, some of those women may not be, but there's something when it comes to our positions and our identities as people who are oppressed, who are marginalized. There's something about, and kind of what I think the film Tangerine kind of shows too, is there's something about being, and not a magically oppressed person, but where you just somehow still make it. But there is something about like I was saying before, if we take it that this world that we live in is very unsustainable to the kinds of worlds we want to live in, or just intolerable to us in the ways that we show up in the world, then we have to be able to come up with strategies, come up with tactics to deal with that. You kind of just have to. And so I think that that's another clear connection between Black feminism or this kind of classic sense of Black women's histories or Black women's studies and the kinds of work that I and other kinds of similar folks are doing. This is also reminding me of Kay's talk earlier in the session on Black trans erotics, and thinking about kind of how other groups use Black trans femmes, whether by name or not, to signify other broader, mirror other things happening in society, or for individuals subconsciously in their own, whatever. So, and I think that that's another really useful way of thinking about the figure of the Black trans femme and what it's doing in terms of needing imagination for these other things that we might have access to. And then in terms of myths, I mean, there's so many different kinds of myths that surround us. I mean, growing up, a myth that I saw that's not like, something I always thought that I saw was, I'm seeing a lot of black women around me who seem to be like the smart one, the one who's capable of doing everything. And then there's these men around who do something, I guess, but and there's things that serve to reify that myth, whether that, which for me looked like not so much a myth, but but then also there's this idea related to transitioning that's like for me, I know other folks make you think about sometimes transitioning when you're younger seems like a myth, and there's so many myths about gender crossing and gender transition, and I used to be a young gay boy and just a young boy and how wonderful would the world be if I could be a woman with or just a person who could have long hair and wear makeup and jewelry and flowy clothes. And so there's something so powerful that I kind of reckon with almost every day. That's the fact that I'm able to show up in the world now, literally just as I am now would be like 6-year-old me would cry and be like, what the fuck? That's awesome, So, and that's also, again, part of the, once you can have that, no one can take that from you. So yeah. I think that, if anything, the myth that one can become, their greatest, dream or vision or whatever is something to hold on to. And the myths to get rid of are the myths that don't let us have that. So myths of the damsel in distress, Perseus saving Andromeda from the sea monster. I don't want that, I want the Amazon queen who's kicking Achilles' ass, in the Iliad, those are the myths I wanna hold on and think about more myself.
Can I say something a little bit about the first time I think I heard you speak, maybe? Because I love the question, and I think your question earlier saw about black feminism and black trans feminism and how they kind of, what do we think about the connection or not? So I think one of the first times that maybe I either heard you speak, but we spoke about Eric Stanley's book, Atmospheres of Violence, together, virtually, actually. And so I'm partially bringing that up to say that I think every time that I hear you speak and also read what you speak, not only do you talk about abolition, but I think in your work, to me, it is abolitionist work. And related to your question about myths, for me, when I think about trans, period, often, so this is me coming from a perspective of both an organizer, an academic, a thinker, a person who works in carceral spaces. So I'm always thinking about carcerality and policing and criminalization. That's where I go to immediately. And so for me, trans is yes, of course, maybe about who we are or whatever, the identity-based thing. But to me, trans is just this other lever to talk about expansion of the carceral state and what that looks like and who's impacted by it and how prisons and policing and all of those things are just made wider. The net is expanding wider based on gender, sexuality, and these things. And so we're often used, right, as these examples of a way for police to further encroach on everybody else's life. So this is the we want to create trans pods in immigration detention, right? That only further expands what it looks like to incarcerate people, right? We only want trans police officers because now everybody can be a cop and we want more carcerality in our world, right? That ethos, right? We're just one of the examples. And so for me, I don't necessarily see the two as different or analogous, but I guess maybe in some way I would, so I'm curious also what other people think. But I guess that's what my answer is to your question about the myth that black trans feminism really explodes. It's the myth around safety and the myth around what these institutions are doing to us, and the myth that they care, the myth that they are sort of providing reprieve or healing or justice. I'm all you have to do is really look at what's happening to black trans folks, period. And all of that is just erased away. You can't say then, right, that cops are here to protect us or whatever. If you look at the statistics you brought up earlier, Sa, right? You can't believe that. You have to at least be critical. You can't say that it's better for folks to be in solitary. Folks brought up CC McDonald earlier and other folks. You can't say that that's providing care for people at all when you see the actual material sort of consequences of those kinds of things. And so to me that's how I think about trans is what it's just a lever, an opening to see what all of these systems and institutions are doing. And it's a particular view when you think about black trans folks and specifically and especially black trans femme folks. That's why I took your question as a sort of oh yeah, the total mythology of like the prison industrial complex. It's like, just look at our lives. Like, it's nowhere there. But anyway, that's how I took the question. Yeah.
I really like that line of thinking because it makes me think of ding, 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 the myth of liberal democracy.
Right.
Yeah, which, in my work I've written about, the sort of liberal property regimes, right? And how those impact Black trans women walking in urban cities, folks, not just Black trans women, but that are doing like any kind of sex work, right, that's highly criminalized. And how like the myth of liberal property, right, in the United States, it's like anybody that does not subscribe to the state's sort of recipe for like proper domesticity, right, a white, cisgender, heteronormative family, right, got nothing against those families, was raised by one, but the states and this, I was sort of like writing and thinking with Kyan Williams, right, the artist, about how property, as it's constituted now, private property, is a sort of violent entity in which like Black trans femmes are moving through public space. That was already the case, right? I wrote that, I've been writing that. Yeah, so I just wanted to pick up on that in terms of the, like we have all of these myths in public culture right now around what we're doing here today as dangerous, right? I tell my students in my intro to trans studies class, folks don't want us to exist, folks don't want us to be meeting. This is a political space, this is a caring space. The myth that we are we also had a hit piece that we are only engaged in trans sex religion, one scholar put it. And so it's like the myth of, DEI as taking something from white folks, right? The myth that woke gender ideology is like sort of encroaching on cisgender women's rights, right? We need to protect the little girls that are playing soccer. I was a little girl that played soccer, and like, I would love to play soccer with anybody that wanted to play with me, right? Like, but they're using that discourse, right, from really kind of second wave feminism, defend women, defend girls, right? They're taking that up, right? The Bill of Women's Rights and all of these like sort of state level anti-trans laws. And that discourse is a type of myth making, right? That they are sort of designing laws for safety of people, to protect people, right? Without thinking about how not just trans citizens, right? But any folks should be worthy of protection. But we see where that breaks down, right? And we can do that with a Black trans feminist lens, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I have so many comments that could come after that. The one thing I'll say now though is that's a great connection. Dang, I wish I said that. Yeah, there's so many there's so many myths that we like live under still that trans people help us see are not real. And like the prison is a great side of that, and also just these myths that like have encroached and like that are just endemic to our thinking and how we're raised. Like literally, as you're saying, like the police will keep you safe. Prisons is where bad people go because they have to. Or poor people don't. You have to work hard to get to deserve. Whatever. It's like all those things, that are so baked into our society and the ways that we think and the ways that we operate. I think particularly the unique, and what we even say in the feminist studies piece too that you referenced earlier, like there's something I think about the unique intersection, I would say, of Black feminist thinking, trans feminist thinking, and I would say disability thinking that allows us to really think about like at the level of the body and the ways that certain kinds of bodies and certain bodies get used in order to make these arguments in these cases, which like y'all are saying isn't just trans people, like it's other people, and like we say in the piece too, it's never just about us, which is always a sad thing too. Like even when it's about like us dying or us being, whatever, it still isn't at the like. If we're truly thinking about what the consequences at the end of the day are, it isn't just about us. So many other people's, bodies and livelihoods are at stake too. So yeah, I think that's just a really important myth to like really untether. And lots of different sites of knowledge tell us that. Not only the statistics, not only the scholarship, the peer-reviewed literature, but also just literal people's experiences. Literal trans people or anyone in prison, more likely than not, will tell you, yeah, I hated it there. They're bad, it's not good, it should be done away with. So.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about, is this on? Yeah. About, well, this idea of myth and property, you bring that up. As a myth, it's a settler colonial construct. It is indigenous lands plus enslaved black labor is how we get this Euro-Western, uniquely settler colonial notion of private property. And so, yeah, I'm happy to do away with that myth. But this idea of the genealogies of our field, that's something I've been thinking a lot about. And related to that, this idea of epistemic privilege, which is something that's relatively new to me. I've been thinking a lot about that. And as I think about that with this idea of imagining otherwise or imagining otherly, it makes me think about those of us who are thinking about the genealogies and what we tap for our field. We get to imagine anew. We get to imagine something unique and special. And I feel like there is a type of epistemic privilege in that. We don't have to be tied to a particular range of genealogies. And so that's something that I've been appreciating a lot with this notion of imagining otherly. Yeah. Y'all have said so much stuff. I feel like I've got like 15 things to say, so I'm going to consult my notes and get our next question.
It's all nonlinear.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to take a moment just to read a little bit from the mission statement of the Black Trans Futurities Symposium, right? Because I think it relates to the work that we're doing. And I think right now, you know, the symposium subtitle is In the Academy and the Arts, but also I know that you know, you've been involved in community work, TGI Justice Project, a lot of knowledge coming out of those spaces. I've mentioned some artists. But yeah, I think also protest spaces, right? And love letters, right? Raquel Willis on January 27th published in Teen Vogue a love letter, dear trans kids, you don't need the government's permission to exist, right? And Raquel Willis is a, you know, public thinker, public Black trans femme thinker. But it reminded me of in this special issue, right, the issue of Blackness in Trans Studies Quarterly, Hayward's piece, don't exist. Yeah. And so I wanted to sort of think about how we can counter that sort of erasure, that sort of disposability that's happening, right, as it connects to other folks in our society, right? I was thinking about how all the purges that like DOGE entity, right, is doing. There's a way in which folks don't understand, right, that the sort of disposability of Black trans folks that the state is sort of producing is also the same state, right, that is like disposing of federal workers right now, right? And there's that connection there, right? And so now, like, people that are working at National Park Service, people that are working with, what is it, you said, they're feeling that do not exist, right? They're feeling that. And a lot of those people are cisgender, heteronormative, you know, maybe conservatives, right? So how do we, as Black trans feminist scholars and thinking with this politics, bring that analysis to the public sphere, right, where it is needed, right? And so I think it relates to our language. So I think there's one way in which we talk to each other, right? And we sort of have these terms and vocabulary. But I think we also, need to be turning to and sort of thinking with triptychs, right? Sort of thinking like, okay, art, academia, kind of organizing movement spaces, right? That's just my little provocation for the panel.
Yeah, I love thinking about all those things together, because there's just like in both my personal and professional lives so many ways in which different tenets of that all come together. So if like mentioning the like the organizing work that I did/do out in the San Francisco Bay Area with TGIJP, the Transgender Variant and Intersex Justice Project, which is for folks who don't know, like a Black trans-led organization that's based on feminist abolitionist principles and works with trans folks who are both on the inside, who are incarcerated, and helping folks after they get out, and helping them with services, therapy, all kinds of things like that. And I got to take part, I helped organize some workshops for a freedom school they did last summer, and that they're still doing now, where I got to come in and lead workshops on creative writing and political education. So getting to do the explicit work of like the two-pronged work of like both our stories matter, and there's ways in which we can think about them. Like I always told the girls in the cohort I work with, no matter what you write, it'll be worth something to me. You know, it's because you matter and you're here and you wrote it, and that's it. You know, that's the math. So there's that, and then also the ability to like radicalize ourselves or gain a political, more nuanced political perspective on society through the act of writing and being in collaboration with other Black trans people. So, and I think like for me, that was always something I searched for in different ways, and like where the triptych, like thinking about different modes of living in the world and different, like I'm like, for like many of us, like we're organizers, but we're also artists, but we're also scholars. And for me, it's important to be all those people and be in all those spaces, most essentially because like, as I mentioned like in my talk at the beginning, I grew up as an only child. So I am always searching for people to mirror off of in that way still. You know, childhood traumatic responses stick with us even as we get older. So there is always a part of me that is both so overjoyed about, you know, this trans thing she got going on, as well as that she can share that with other people, and that is good and okay. And like that's, I think, such a basic elementary thing that that I always come to and I always kind of use as my launching pad for why these politics matter, why asking these questions matter. And also the richness that comes from doing that work, because it leads us to all these great, you know, challenging places that we are, like how we think about property, how we think about care, how we think about domesticity, and how we, you know, stay in the struggle with each other. But then also how we do our best to not repeat some of these cyclical things that, you know, that tend to happen over and over. And the fact that these political projects that seem to like definitely impact trans people and Black people, that also, you know, ensnare other people in the net too, you know, is why I think thinking through these kinds of lines of thought and like modes of inquiry is really important, so.
LaVelle, that answer makes me think about something a friend reminded me of once, which is sometimes the movement work is for us. And I feel like that's what I hear you talking about, that when we think about how do we bring these ideas to the public, we're so often thinking about how do we address a public that's against us, how do we build power to challenge things that are hurting us. But like what I hear you offering us is that we also could just do stuff for us, like to make us more powerful without whether other people are there to fight with or not. But also in response to your questions, the classroom is such an important space. I feel like such a normie saying that, kind of, but I think it's true. Like, I sit down and I think about like how many people I've taught a year. Like, we can touch hundreds of people over a few years, and that's part of why they're trying to shut that space down. Like, I have this memory, in a fit of like, we're just gonna do it, I assigned Mama's Baby to an Intro to African American Studies class. I was like, let's just read and see what happens. I don't know. That feels fun, right? I was having fun. I don't know if they were having fun, but one of the young cis men Black cis men in my class, he came up to talk to me after class, and he was like, I was really struck by what Spillers is saying about, he was like, insurgent grounds, and I said, and we had this beautiful conversation where I was like, part of what Spillers is saying to you specifically But I think an extension of that to your question, Sa, is part of what we can say to folks in the public is that Black trans feminism offers an ability to be, for you to be whoever you want to be. Like, you don't have to, like, you can find a Black masculinity that works for you. And he was like, huh, and I was like, yeah. And I think the classroom is a special space where it's a political space, but it is not a space for getting students to agree with us, which is, I think, an important distinction, right? It is shaped by power, and there are ways I am trying to intervene, but I'm not trying to tell them like what they should think or who they should be, where that kind of shift can happen. And I think that's a special place where we can talk to like the quote unquote public, and I think highlights for me what gets in the way of some of our like people who we're in community with in some ways, but not around gender, is the healing that like they need to do around the harm they've experienced in their gender experience gets in the way of them like being in community with us. I've experienced this a lot with some of my like, you know, like Black women colleagues, where for them like, they're like, I want to be a part of the thing because I'm being excluded from it. And so I don't know, what is a way of talking to the public that acknowledges the healing that maybe isn't my place to help people work through, but needs to happen before people can even hear the critique that's being made, I think, is a question I think about a lot.
The story with your student was so lovely because I was going to say both, but your story was both. Like, for us, what you were saying, you heard from LaVelle, it's like, it's for us, but also, how do we also talk to other people? And then, I'm gonna come back to that, but you said you felt normie. I want to get rid of the classroom. Don't tell my job that. I don't want to get rid of learning. I don't want to get rid of learning. I don't want to get rid of like collectivity. I don't want to get rid of like communal, like being together, but I do want to get rid of the classroom. But we can talk about that over drinks or something. Yeah, like over drinks or whatever. But yeah, back to the other point. So I was at a different thing like a few weeks ago, and I had this like, to just the like broad conversation thing. I had this like really great conversation with someone who worked at a hotel, this like older Black dude, and he was just saying like his job is sort of like in jeopardy because a lot of Fed workers would come and use the hotel space, and now that they can't or they don't, like he might lose his job. And so like we were talking about that, and then like I started talking about like, and he didn't ask me before this, I talked to him like 10 times. He was like, why are you here? And I was just like, oh, gender stuff, whatever. He was like, okay, like what does that mean? Like he was like, yeah, like Black men. And I was like, no, not like Black men teacher. Like, but we had this like really helpful conversation, and then like at the end of it, it wasn't me saying this, it was him. He was like, oh yeah, they're coming for all of us. And I was like, that's the point that like I want to like, we can branch off from that point. Who is the they, and like how and where and when. But like, yeah. And he kind of saw that in part of what I was saying about, I was talking about like anti-trans legislation and like the presentation I was gonna give. But anyway, but you said the both. Because like I didn't come to that space for that dude. Like I was in a closed conversation with like a bunch of other like trans folks, not only Black trans people, but like he as an older Black man is also like a part of my community, as many of them are in my family and a part of my community. And I'm like, I want to engage him because he also was engaging me in this moment. And not that that's everybody, but he was, and like he felt this sense of like connectedness because he was like, oh, they're coming for my job, they're coming for you as a person. And I don't know, I just find that like to be really powerful and important even now, even in some people, not that you said this of course, but like in some people sort of like disdain for like everybody. Like we shouldn't engage people who just like aren't like in the sort of purest political position as us. And I'm just like, that doesn't help. Like we all also aren't in the same place. And so I'm like, how do I, you know, so for me that feels like my ongoing like question to myself, and a lot of times it's like who and when and how do I want to engage. And like in that moment it was him, because he was like, I feel really precarious, and I was like, shit, like a lot of people in my life are too, and like how can we talk about that? But anyway, you're both in, I think was really important in your story. Yeah.
I don't have a clock up here, and I can't see my collaborator. Okay, great. So I think that I'm going to ask one more question and pose it to the panelists, and then I'd like to open it up. So if folks actually, have some questions to sort of add to this conversation, that would be great. But I know that a lot of us work with concepts like fugitivity, right? Black trans fugitivity. And so I wanted to sort of think with how are we understanding the work of folks like Marquise Spey and C. Riley Snorton and Che Gossett, right? Around trans fugitivity, particularly Black trans fugitivity and the histories, that invokes for African descendant folks in this place. But also, what does fugitivity, Black trans fugitivity, have to do with Black trans futurity, right? Because I think there's a way in which in this moment we could be very like war of position, sort of like in this like moves and counter moves with like what the state is doing. And especially it's like this wrestle over, I sort of have to return to this wrestle over legibility, right? But a lot of Black trans feminist politics is about illegibility, right? Because even where some trans folks were included, right? There's always those that are like seen as still too deviant to be sort of deserving of full citizenship rights, too deviant to be seen as worthy of public space, right? Or healthcare, right? So I think that there is this link, and I'd love to hear anybody on the panel that wants to sort of tease that out. So do a little bit of that if you'd like, or maybe if it comes up in your own work.
That's for y'all.
Okay.
Well, Eshe thinks on that. For me in my work, like I can think specifically about, I remember thinking about, for those who've written a dissertation, not to exclude others, but there's something about like throwing on what's this project gonna be? And literally before I got to imagination, the first thing was prison abolition. And there was a really difficult way to like work through that in the project. So then it was fugitivity. And again, I had trouble like really thinking through that element in both the text I was reading and like the scholars I was engaging with, like those you just listed. And then landed on imagination finally to be this thing that I saw as not encompassing everything, but allowing me to talk about different elements of abolition, of fugitivity, of transversality or whatever, in order to make the point consistently across the text that I'm analyzing. So for me, I think like fugitivity specifically in terms of like being Black, trans, and like what these positions allow us to think through and like work through, something that I often think is like, I don't know, will always be some element of Black transness that will always be like on the run, or that we refuse capture in this way that's like you can't ever actually nail it down, and that's important. And like Ash just said, like it's damn it, literally it's out of my head. But you just said something about like typing in my head as I'm talking. That's why I'm like, what does it look like? Who will play her? But like I think the question of like fugitivity helps us see the figure, like for example, the figure, okay, here we go. The figure of the fugitive isn't just like the person who's exactly on the run. Like others can still be caught up in that sphere of what's fugitive or could be deemed fugitive. And I just think that there's a lot of power in that a lot of Black trans people and queer people across time and space have understood in different ways and harnessed in order to literally get free, in order to make it, in order to turn, a barn into a ballroom space. Like there's been lots of different outcomes from that need to be able to escape from these different kinds of capturing modes that even today we still live under. So that's kind of where my thinking about it goes, not so much the writing part, but like the thinking and kind of what's useful, particularly in like Snorton's work around fugitivity and the way that like other folks get caught up in that too. It's not just a simple, it's not a simple arrangement of these are the fugitives, these are the non-fugitives. I think that that's too easy a binary that we shouldn't impose. So yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And now I'd like to invite folks in the audience, if anybody has a question. I see up front. Is that for people to, I don't know. That's for, okay, great. Can you? Okay, I'll bring this. Oh, okay. It'll, I guess.
I can say there? Hello. So Raquel Willis talks a little bit about how we're going to come to regret positioning the Black trans woman as like the epitome of the struggle. And similarly, in the conversation that we're having about myth, I'm wondering about the narratives that we have about loss, deceased, Black trans folks, and how we position them to like be close to saintliness. And so I'm wondering if there's, for all of y'all, if anything resonates with y'all about like a Black trans divinity. Do we get Black trans muses, right? Or is that similarly just as binding as like thinking about the Black trans woman as like at the crux of all of these different sort of struggles? I'm also wondering for Ian-Khara specifically, if you could engage this question in reference to temporality. So what does it mean to be like God's strongest warrior in life and in death?
Do you need some stall time while you, okay. I'm gonna give you some time. LaVelle, you wanna?
No, you go.
Oh, okay. I love that you brought up Raquel Willis's critique, because I worry about something similar. Where when we make people saints, they aren't people anymore. You know, it's an ongoing debate within Black trans studies about how we should even think about humanity as a framework through which we acknowledge people's being in the world. So I want to acknowledge that, but to me, it's important. Like, what would it mean if just being is sacred? You don't have to do anything, right? You don't have to save anybody. You don't have to be God's strongest warrior. Like, you would just be here. And we treat that with the level of seriousness and like care and attention, especially for Black trans women and Black, why do they have to do any, like, just be here? And I think the person actually who inspires me to think about that is someone that me and Dr. Ridley both know, which is Dr. Cassie Campbell, who's also at The Ohio State University, and works in Black girlhood studies, and asks a similar question about Black girls, understood broadly. Why can't they just be in the world? Why do they have to be the thing we build our future on? Let them just be here. And so I think, I love that question, and that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, that was a great connection too. As you were starting to get onto it too, I was like, there's someone else who approaches this question like that, thinking about similar demographics. I mean, yeah, just to build on that, you know, it has been an ongoing, you know, conversation in circles, black and brown trans circles about, you know, putting folks on pedestals, and, you know, I'm so familiar, you know, with my like love of mythology, like both as like a study and like as just as stories that tell us stuff. At first, I'm so like drawn and attracted to like the idea of like, you know, yeah, like we're goddesses or like, you know, whatever. Like that's, you know, like there's some kind of, you know, psychic value to that of like, you know, of affirmation. But like Eshe said, it then strips the person of their personhood, you know, of their humanity, and instills another value system of like, oh, so the trans woman, the Black trans woman who throws the brick at Stonewall, we honor her. The Black trans woman who, you know, gets murdered for like self-defense, we honor her. But what about all the other girls, you know, or whatever? So resisting the desire to like, this colonial desire to like instantiate a hierarchy of value, is something that is important to think against. And I would even say, like, for me, like, in terms of like a Black trans divinity, or, I think that there's so many different, there's so many different things that we can have and that can be ours. And what that then goes on to mean, and to go back to like Spillers and like Hartman and others, like what that means in the symbolic order of things does not have to mirror what already exists in like normative kinds of scales of things. So, for example, I love you said, do we get Black trans muses? So, not to nerd out too much, but like, okay, so there's 9 muses that govern, in Greek mythology, that govern different areas of creativity. So like, while that is true and just a fact of the mythology, if we really think specifically, different like areas of specialization or different domiciles that deities had actually was a tool of different ancient Greek writers, philosophers, statesmen, whatever, throughout time in order to enforce different ideas about society. So for the ancient Greeks, they also loved the 3. So 3 times 3, 9 muses. But what that also does is limits us to just those 9 arts, So if you don't love astronomy, history, epic poetry, or sacred hymns, you're out of luck, If you want to rap, beatbox, play video games, there's no muse for you, So in my ideal world, there would be many, many, many Black trans muses who govern all these forms of creativity and don't have to serve to reify any kind of symbolic order. If you want specifically a muse that's like the queen of comedy, that's your muse. You get to have her, and that's that. So it goes back to like what Ash is saying, like why can't the girls just live or just be? So I think embracing that kind of thinking can be really transformative.
That's interesting. I think a somewhat counterpoint is like related to like your methodology, like your sort of Black trans epistemology that's at the root of your like storytelling and life stories methodology. Because looking at the Digital Trans Archive, I think Marsha P. Johnson's community called her Saint Marsha, and I think that wasn't. I'm excited for Tourmaline's book coming out in May, a biography of Marsha P. Johnson. But, in my estimation, right, this is because of like work like STAR, right? Housing, trans, what we would maybe call trans now, or street queens in New York City, right? And seeing their lives and gender nonconforming youth in New York City, right, in the 70s, the 60s and 70s. And so I don't know, I think when I connect that literal sort of archival piece, right, that's really sort of, you could sort of think with STAR and critique gendered racial capitalism, like, and the rise of neoliberalism, right, from then to now, right? And also the ways that she and Sylvia Rivera are sort of at that moment, like I'm thinking when Sylvia Rivera gets on stage at the Christopher Street Day Liberation Parade and sort of tells the sort of gay and lesbian folks to like listen the fuck up, like not to ignore trans folks, like what a message that we need right now when all these websites, right, that are scrubbing trans have LGB. Right. So what is the responsibility of the LGB? That's another sort of the folks. That's another sort of question there. But that's just to get back to sainthood. I mean, I wonder if it is about something different, like that sort of mutual aid, those sort of like collective economies of care and support, and alternative kinship and siblinghood, and ways that we steal from the state, at times. Like, So I just wanted to bring that out. I think thinking with all of this, but then at the same time, it's like sometimes Marsha P. Johnson is called on in the most like empty way. It's like her image is just like circulating, and it's like then it becomes like the figure of Marsha P. Johnson, and not even folks talking about what she was about or doing, right? But I want to maybe have one more question from the audience, and then I think. Oh, did you want to? Yeah. Oh, you're right. Oh, great. Yeah, maybe we'll close out with you. Yeah.
You called me into this, so I'm going to.
Yes.
But I guess first, thinking about this idea of divinity, Combahee River Collective, they were like, look, don't put us on a pedestal. We don't want to. We are not trying to be on a pedestal. We're also not trying to walk 7 paces behind. Like just let us be. Like, let us live, let us exist. And so that's coming to mind for me around this notion of divinity. But yeah, you know, as you know, I've been exploring temporality a little bit, and I gave it away that part of the reason that's been so interesting to me lately is because I do feel myself getting a little bit older, so, so that's like really, but really thinking about this idea of transness as throughout the course of a life. And what does it look like then if anybody's going to be made divine? What does it look like for us to shine that light on our little, you know, effeminate boys, you know, or our little tomboy girls, you know, like, let them be divine. And then what's going to happen a decade from then or 20 years later? Like, who do they get to become, you know, if we get to treat that deviance as precious, as divine? So I think that's what's coming up for me around that. Thank you.
And I know that we'll talk about temporality some more tomorrow because I think it's so integral to conversations and theories of futurity. I'm thinking with Munoz again, right, in the early 2000s, the way he sort of says that queerness is not yet here, like it hasn't arrived. It's always in the horizon, and I sort of wonder if there's like this complement in sort of trans studies, right? Have we, or even just being and culture, like have we gotten to trans, like the, you know, I don't know. Yeah, so there's like these sort of conversations that we can have because I know it's not just about sort of one type of embodiment, and like Black trans studies does not have one object of study, right? Like, but you know, it's sort of like that dialectic between wanting to center Black trans femme materialisms, right, and embodiment and struggle, right, as like very real, but also wanting to, you know, take that Black trans analytic and sort of put it against empire, you know, like, like take it to the border, and sort of all these other ways of sort of mobilizing Black trans theories for like world making, right? But okay, so I think that we will end there. I know it's about 6:15 thereabouts. Yeah, but please do come and talk to the presenters. I'd like to give another round of applause for Dr. LaVelle Ridley. Yeah. Yeah. And our panelists here today. Woo, woo, woo. Yeah. So yeah, we get to kiki tomorrow, but hopefully folks that are out there in the room and out on the digital sphere can think with this conversation for a long time to come. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our sponsors once again and the staff. And I think we'll close out there. Thank you.